Hello learners, welcome to this another session on your course BFDI 072 Basics of Pattern Making and Sieving. In this session, we will discuss the topic stitch formation, that is the part of your unit 6, that is sieving needles and stitch formation. In the earlier session, we have discussed about the sieving needles. In this, we will focus on stitch formation. Let us point what topics we will be discussing in this session. In this particular session, we will cover stitch formation, stitch per inch, what stitch formation is, what is stitch per inch and how we should understand it. We will discuss about the general rules for the stitching and we will discuss setting up a sieving machine and its safety precautions. So first let us understand why this particular topic is important for you. So after going through this particular topic or unit, we can say you can recognize and describe different types of stitch formations, what different types of stitch formations are there, how you will use that for the construction of a garment, and you can identify and rectify common sieving problems. Sometimes when you start doing the stitching using the sewing machine, you will face some common problems and what common problems are there and how you will overcome that we will discuss in this particular session. So when we talk about stitch, we understand that when we join two fabrics together, we need a type of stitch to join that. So how this particular type of stitch is formed, especially when we are having the machine, we are doing the machine stitching, how do the stitch forms? So there are certain steps in the formation of a stitch. First is when we need, and as in the earlier session we discussed, that was that the main element for the construction of garment is the needle. So needle, it first helps in the formation of a stitch. So needle when penetrates the fabric, taking the needle thread into the bobbin area. So in the structure you can see and understand that the needle when goes into the fabric or penetrates into the fabric, taking the needle thread into the bobbin area. As we discussed in the when we were discussing about the machine and its structure, we learned that in the machine when we are using it for the stitching purpose, we understand that there are two types or two sets of thread which are used for the stitching purpose. In that we have the needle thread and the bobbin thread. So in this first step, when the needle is penetrates into the fabric, taking the needle thread into the bobbin area. So bobbin area is on the bed surface or the bed part of the machine, and needle is at the upper part of the machine. So when the needle goes into the fabric, taking the needle thread to the bobbin area. In the second step, needle thread forms the loop. As the needle thread rises top thread from a top and it forms the loop at the side of the needle, and the shuttle hook, the part of the needle, the shuttle hook takes the needle thread loop around the bobbin case. So in the structure you can see and understand the needle goes into the fabric, penetrates into the fabric, and it goes below up to the bobbin area, and it forms, as it rises up again, it forms a type of a loop and it passes from the bobbin case. So loop goes around the bobbin thread and is released, and then last setting of the stitch is happened. So needle thread gets pulled up and is tightened to set the stitch into the material. So you can understand how do a stitch forms. We have the needle, with a thread inserted into the needle. Then when the machine moves, the needle goes into the fabric and it goes to the bobbin area, and as the needle rises, top thread forms the loop at the side of the needle, and then the shuttle hook of the machine, it takes the needle thread around the bobbin case to form a loop, and that loop goes around the bobbin thread and is released. And lastly, the needle thread gets pulled up and is tightened to set the stitch into the material. So this is how, when the machine is moving continuously, a proper row of stitching is happened. So this is how a stitch is formed into the material. Then there is one important terminology and the process which we have to understand, that is SPI, or stitches per inch. Stitches per inch means the size of stitch depends upon the fabric thickness. I will repeat this slide. So one of the most important topic or terminology we can say, which is important to understand in the process of stitching, is stitches per inch, or in the short form we say it as a SPI. So SPI, or stitch per inch, means the number of stitches in a 1 inch of a stitch, 1 inch of a fabric. So the size of the stitch depends upon the fabric thickness. Like if we have the heavyweight fabric, the size or the number of the stitches what we have on the fabric should be more as compared to the lightweight fabric or thin fabric. So the same stitch size cannot be used for every type of the fabric we are using. So we should know, we should understand what type of fabric we are using and what will be the number of stitches or the size of the stitches according to the fabric. So it needs to be changed according to the fabric what we are using. The finer the fabric, the smaller should be the stitch side, and vice versa. Like if we have the smaller, finer fabric, we need small number of sizes, stitches. If we have the coarser fabric, we need a large number or large size of stitches on the fabric. So the stitch regulator has marking on it. Like if you see the machine, we have discussed the stitch regulator and it has marking on it, and using that stitch regulator which indicates the size of the stitches in mm, we adjust the type or size of the stitches what we are using. So SPI, we right now discussed that SPI stands for stitch per inch, and the main purpose, the main gist we can understand from this, that finer the fabric, the more should be the SPI, and SPI and stitch size are very much related to each other. Then now let us understand what are some common sewing problems when you go for the stitching of a garment or fabric. You will find some common sewing problems. Let us understand what its causes are there and what remedies you can do to overcome that problems. First problem you can face when you are using a sewing machine and you are going for a stitching, that needle thread breaking. First common problem we face, that this is a very common problem, the needle thread breaking, and that you might come across very frequently when you use the sewing machine. So the upper thread that goes through the needle keeps breaking frequently. If this happens, the cause why this happens very frequently, it may cause because the machine may be incorrectly threaded, and follow the correct thread to overcome that particular problem. Like when we were discussing the machine, we discussed about the thread guide. Like there on the machine, every machine we have a particular thread guide position, which is very important to understand to fix the thread very perfectly on the machine. So if the machine thread is not adjusted or not put correctly, this common problem you can face, that needle thread will break very easily. Like the upper tension may be too tight. Like one of the common next cause can be the upper thread tension of the needle is too tight, and this exert extra pressure on the thread. And to reduce the tension on the upper thread by rotating the nut on the tension regulator anti-clockwise, you can adjust the tension, and if the thread is too tight, you can adjust it. One more cause for this particular problem, that needle may be incorrectly installed. Just check your needle whether it is installed correctly or not. If it is not installed or not inserted into the needle bar correctly, just do it and install it in correct way. Needle may be bent, blunt or damaged. Like the needle which you are using for the stitching, machine needle which you are using, it is bent or damaged or blunt from any part, you can change the needle and overcome this problem. And one more cause for this particular needle thread breaking can be the poor quality of thread which you are using. The thread you are using is not of a good quality or according to the fabric. So you can check it, and if it is not appropriate, you can use a good quality thread. Second common problem which we face when we are using a sewing machine is the bobbin thread breaking. First we discuss about the needle thread breaking. Second is the bobbin thread breaking. Sometimes the lower thread coming out of the bobbin keeps breaking very frequently. It may be because the lower tension may be too tight. The tension on the bobbin part of the machine is very tight. So you can reduce the tension on the bobbin case and check it whether it is working properly or not. The bobbin case may have sharp edges that may worn out and replace with the another. If the bobbin case, the sharp edges which on the bobbin case has become very sharp and it is due to that the thread is breaking, you can replace your bobbin case. Bobbin may be unevenly wound or too full. Like the thread which is wound on the bobbin, it is very not wounded on that evenly, or it is too much full. So you can remove the thread and wind the bobbin correctly. Next problem what we face is the skipped stitches. Skipped stitches means sometimes when we are stitching a fabric, few stitches are missing in a row of stitches. Like when we are stitching, we are not having a smooth line of stitches. Some stitches in the between of a line is missing. So long floats of thread are seen instead of regular stitches. Like we are having not having the even stitches. Sometimes we are having the even, then we have some long stands of the long floats of the thread, and this happens to be said as the skip stitching. So the hook does not catch the needle thread and the loop is not formed properly. So the main causes of this particular problem can be machine which we are using may be incorrectly threaded. Like the threading or what we have done for the machine is not correctly threaded. So what we can do, we can follow the correct threading sequence to make it appropriate. Needle which we are using may be incorrectly installed, so we can check the needle. Also, if it is not installed correctly, we can make it in a proper position. There may be a lack of pressure on the pressure foot, so we can increase the pressure on the pressure foot. Sometimes due to less pressure also we do not have the even stitching, or we can have the skip stitching. So we should check the pressure on the pressure foot and increase it with the pressure regulator. Then we have the needle may be too fine for the fabric which is being used. So needle should be appropriate according to the fabric. Take a higher needle number for a thick fabric, as we discussed now. Needle may be bent, blunt or damaged. Because of this, that skip stitching can happen, and if it is so, we can replace the needle with the new one. Another problem we face when we are doing a stitching is needle breaking. Needle breaking means sometimes while we are sewing, the needle keeps on breaking very frequently. Why? Because needle may be too fine for the fabric we are using. So take a higher needle number for a thick fabric. So as we discussed, the thread, needle, it all depends upon the fabric what we are using. So it should be according to the type of fabric we are using. So sewing over pins, button, zipper leads to the needle breaking. Like if we are having the fabric which has the pins or the buttons or the zipper, if the needle comes over that, it breaks sometimes. So we should have a very safe, or if we are stitching at that particular point, we should stitch very carefully. Another cause can be pressure foot may be loose, or needle strikes against the edge of the pressure foot and breaks. So we can fix the pressure foot properly before using the machine. And pulling material to one side while taking it out of the machine, or while sewing needle, while sewing leads to the needle breaking, avoid it. Like sometimes we do when we are running the machine and we have completed our stitching, at the end of the fabric we sometimes just pull the fabric directly and it makes the needle to break. So we should not do that. Stop the machine and then properly remove the fabric from, if the needle is inserted, just move the needle upward and then remove the fabric. Another common problem we face is puckering on both layers of the fabric. Like puckering means uneven stitching. The main cause of this particular common problem, puckering, can be because of needle too large or thick for the fabric which is used for the stitching. So what we can do, we can replace the needle with the finer one or the coarser one according to the fabric what we are using. So both upper and the lower thread tension may be too tight. So if both upper and the lower thread tension is, if it is too tight, we will not have the even stitching, or the fabric will not be smooth. So we can have wrinkles on the fabric. So if it is coming, the fabric is getting puckered when we are stitching the garment, we should check the upper thread and the lower thread tension, and if it is not proper, we should correct it. Needle may be bent, blunt or damaged. If it is so, we can replace the needle according to the fabric type. And the size of stitches may be too long for the material being sewn. Like if we have not adjust the stitch length according to the fabric type we are using, it may give pucker on the fabric. So change the stitch size with the help of a stitch regulator. So learners, in this session we discussed that the ideal stitches are formed when the needle thread and the bobbin thread are perfectly interlocked and in the center of the fabric what we are using. So the stitch tension should be balanced for a good quality work. And we discussed about the SPI, that is stitches per inch. In that we discussed the finer the fabric, the more will be the stitch per inch, and thus the smaller the stitches will be there. And we discussed about the stitch formation, the formation in which we discussed that the stitch is formed in stages of 5. In the first, we discussed that needle is penetrated into the fabric, needle thread forms a loop, then the loop goes around the bobbin case, and the bobbin thread goes through the loop and the stitch is formed and set in the fabric. So this is how the stitch is formed on a fabric. So in this session we discussed all about the formation of the stitch and most importantly stitch per inch. Hope this session will be beneficial for you. Thank you.